been Kansas City suburbs. Yeah. Okay.
It's actually
Okay. Awesome.
I was gonna say, when you say Kansas, I'm pretty sure that's
So you're doing undergrad, right?
here.
Yeah.
Just arcade.
You can say, wow. You look young. Nice. What's that? Yeah. Oh wow. Okay. That's nice. Yeah. Yeah, in different areas. Yeah.
Let's go.
We've had O&R in the past. After Kyoki left, they sort of petered out. Miter's Simmons corner. Kyoki's talking next week. So he's coming to talk. Teaches some classes. I should know this. You pronounce your last name Wohletz? Wohletz. My last name is Van Brookins. I understand hard.
Generally, we say
Wohletz. Right. Yeah. I just go with it. Van something. Yes, that's me. Yeah. It's the OE that kills people. They want to do OO for Brookhaven. Yeah. Hello, BWSI. Hello, BWSI. BWSI is? Thank you. Bob reminded me earlier that we are a day into the second half of BWSI. I assume everybody is getting plenty of sleep, is well rested, is energetic, but I'm sure the adrenaline will kick in, and you guys will be fantastic for the second half here. We're really excited to see what you come up with as we get towards the final event. Today, we are very, very fortunate to have a fantastic speaker. So we have Jerry Wohletz, who is the president and CEO of Draper Laboratories, which is a storied organization that grew out of Doc Draper's instrumentation laboratory here at MIT, did much of the pioneering research in inertial navigation, including leading the inertial navigation or the navigation effort for the initial Apollo missions to the moon. It's really an amazing organization. Jerry comes there after 3 years ago, came there 3 years ago, after a number of senior executive positions at BAE. He is an MIT alum with his PhD at MIT, and he has been a huge supporter of the BWorks Summer Institute for a number of years. So we're really fortunate to have Jerry here today. So thank you, Jerry.
All right, thank you, Scott. So today I was asked to give a presentation that I rarely give, but I did give it last year. And Bob had asked that I give this one again. So to get things rolling here, we're going to talk about leadership, right? But leadership is kind of a generic word, right? Can anyone tell me what are characteristics of leadership? By the way, we will do interactiveness. Yes. Do what? Being able to take the blame and responsibility of Okay, so take the blame for others. Go ahead. Lead by example. Lead by example. The ability to connect ideas, most likely of that of others, right? And then the second part was? Also forming new ones. So I'm going to say half of my definition is that one. Yes? Being brave? Okay, I'll give you that one. All right, over here.
Knowing how to communicate.
Knowing how to communicate. And why do you need to communicate as a leader?
Because you need to be able to organize a group of people and make them feel inspired to execute.
Love it. And if you inspire people, what happens? Yes? They do better work. All right, we're pretty darn close to the definition. So this is a definition that I borrowed from the Harvard Business Review. The ability to develop a vision and inspire others to achieve great results. All right, so this will be paramount here to this presentation. So developing a vision is all about leaders. It's not their ideas. It is about good ideas, right? It's not crowdsourced, but it is good ideas that emerge from conversations and dialogues with others. And essentially, it paints a brighter future of tomorrow. And in this presentation, we'll call it the what a leader has to be able to articulate. But then the leader has the second half of this, and they have to inspire the team. The team to determine the what, but ultimately, the team to deliver results that are actually exceed what they understand they're capable of doing. And that is the how. So believe it or not, the ability to develop that vision and inspire others is an extremely rare commodity. A very rare commodity. And so now I'm going to take this definition one step further, and we're going to talk about personal leadership. So we're going to take now the Harvard Business School view of leadership and apply it to you as individuals. The ability to develop a vision and inspire yourself to achieve great results. And that is the premise of my talk today. So before we get into that, let me give you some of the results to date for my, believe it or not, 33 years postgraduate, undergraduate degree doing this for our nation. So a variety of titles. Scott already told you what my current role is at the Draper Laboratory. And you see a whole series of roles, and again, this is all post-graduating with an undergraduate degree. But within that, here are the different roles that I have played. And a couple of things that I will highlight here: thought leader, change agent, strategist, and I would say, more importantly of all, mentor. I've worked at a lot of different places, right? Scott talked to you about 2 organizations, Draper Laboratories, and then prior to that, BA Systems. But I've worked for 2 large aerospace defense companies. I've actually worked for 2 startups. I've spent time supporting the United States government, both at NASA and at AFRL, and I also have done a little bit of time in academia. So throughout my 33 years, I have actually jumped around to different companies. And then finally, I have certainly received several accolades. I'll highlight the one most recent, top 10 CEO of the year last year in 2024. So those are the results to date, which now takes me to, how did I get here? And to answer this question, I have to take you back about 2 decades ago when one of my assistants said, "You are exactly the image of a person that I always have of someone growing up with a silver spoon in your mouth." And I was like, well. And then I realized, actually, I had never really told my story about how I got to where I was at. And that began my journey of telling this story. So my leadership story, I actually grew up in Kansas, right? My wife actually grew up in Kansas as well, married. We have 3 kids. Oldest is 23, middle is 20, and the youngest is 16. But unlike, and by the way, once you're done having kids, you have pets. It actually prevents the 4th kid. So we have both a cat and a dog, and have had a whole series of cats and dogs since we were done having kids. So now, typically, when you say the word Kansas, people are thinking, farms, prairie, cows. But the reality is that I grew up in Kansas City, Kansas. Now, if you're from the Midwest, you understand what I mean by that. But if you're not from the Midwest, you're thinking Midwest, Kansas, Kansas City. That's a place somewhere in the middle of the country that you fly over to get from coast to coast. All right? But if you are from the Midwest, you know that Kansas City, Kansas has actually a very distinct reputation. It is characterized by extreme poverty and everything that goes along with extreme poverty, violence, drugs, you name it. It is, in fact, for those that are aware of those TV shows, Cops, KC SWAT, notice KC SWAT, the environment that I grew up with is often filmed by those shows. And that's where I grew up, which is very counter to the notion of, well, Kansas. Now, the common path for where I grew up was graduate from high school, go to the community college or VOTEC school, and then ideally you're going to land a job working for the city, whether it's the public works, the fire department, or the police department. But for my situation, a little different, because not only was I in that environment, I was also a struggling student. And in fact, to get between 3rd and 4th grade, I had to go to summer school. Now, I know that things are a little different here, where people actually go to summer school, they take Russian math and do all these things to better themselves. If I didn't go to summer school, I didn't go to the 4th grade. And so in the summer, unlike most kids who are out playing sports and playing baseball, I got a backpack going to school, and that's kind of, and I struggled all throughout school at that point. And then there was one other problem. Evidently, I had a lot of energy, and I always found myself in trouble. So not a great environment, always in trouble. You can pretty much extrapolate forward what that outcome is, right? And there were plenty of examples from where I grew up of extrapolating forward and what that outcome was. Whether that's living in a house without heat, right, in jail, or even worse. So for whatever reason, and I cannot explain this to this day, I started thinking about that extrapolation forward. And I was like, man, I don't want to be that person, the typical person that grows up in that environment. So in about 6th grade, I made a commitment to myself that I actually wanted to be a credit to society, not a deficit. And I was going to commit every day to bettering myself, day by day. So I started on my path, started proceeding forward. I graduate from high school, but there was a fundamental issue I had is I still did not have the minimum competencies to enter college. But back in 6th grade, right, I made a commitment to myself that in that betterment, I was going to set a bold vision for me. So I'm going to go through 6 things I highly recommend that you all think about. And the first one is have a big dream. So in 6th grade, I said, I want to be an astronaut. Now, again, if you go back to that period of time, right, the Apollo program is over, but the space shuttle program is ramping up, right? Space flight was still quite the focus of the attention in the United States. And I decided I would love to be an astronaut. To be an astronaut, now you start to walk that backwards. Most astronauts were fighter pilots. Most fighter pilots either went to a service academy or they got an engineering degree. And ideally, most of the fighter pilots that were engineers were aerospace engineers. So clearly, I wasn't going to make it into a service academy. So I decided that I was going to go and become an aerospace engineer. But boy, did I have a little bit of a problem with that. So again, coming out of high school, I would say that my reading and writing competencies were questionable, right, at the high school level, certainly not college. And calculus, what's that? And so I'm going to become an aerospace engineer. So this takes me to my second lesson that I'd like to highlight, is that take your chances when they present themselves to you, right? You have to acknowledge that half of everything in life is pure luck. And if luck presents itself, don't turn your back to it. So the only reason I was able to go to the University of Kansas is at that time, Kansas was the last state to have open admissions for residents. And open admissions meant that all siblings of taxpayers, residents of Kansas, got 1 semester admission. You didn't get it for free, you still had to pay. But you could go 1 semester to one of the state universities. And I chose University of Kansas because it was the only program at the time that had an aerospace engineering program in it. So I entered the University of Kansas, promptly put on probation because I did not meet the minimum requirements. I was, in fact, not allowed to enter the aerospace engineering program because I did not meet minimum requirements. So I entered a pre-engineering curriculum, which meant basically take courses at 7 a.m. every morning. The intention is that you're actually not going to show up, you're going to have a lot of fun in college, and you'll be there for your 1 semester and then you'll be gone. So I approached it a little differently. I had this bold vision of who I wanted to become, and rest assured, I certainly learned how to party in high school, right? I excelled. And again, different time, and I would have done wonderful in a fraternity for 1 semester. But instead of doing that, I studied 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Literally took a grammar book and read it cover to cover and did it over and over and over again so that I could learn how to write. And so after my very first semester at University of Kansas, and by the way, I got these letters because I'm in the demographic that you're supposed to go have that fun, but they didn't want you to have too much fun, nor did they want you to get too discouraged. So you always got here's the helpline to call in the middle of the night if you really got yourself into a pickle. Well, I stopped getting those letters when, after my first semester, instead of getting my minimum C GPA to stay, I got straight A's. And the letters from the university went, well, people like you don't do that, so we're going to pay for college as long as you get A's. And by the way, it was lucky because I had no means to pay for college. So again, here comes luck again. So for the next 5 years in total, 4.5 years after that letter, because it took me 5 years to get a 4-year degree, because how far I was behind, I got 2 B's. The rest were A's. My entire undergraduate was paid for by a whole series of scholarships that I didn't even apply to. The school brought them to me. Right? Graduated with top distinctions. In fact, was the speaker at graduation for the engineering school. And so when your chances present themselves, don't hesitate, take them, and run. So now, this takes me to my third recommendation. I started to reflect back on how hard it was. The University of Kansas is like 44 miles from where I grew up. Quite driving distance, with an interstate highway to boot, right, going right by it. Not very far. But it was amazing how homesick I was. Even though I knew I needed to get out of that environment, tremendously homesick. But I started thinking about that. I went to a place for which, let's be honest, I really didn't belong. I worked really, really hard, and I developed as a person at a much higher rate than had I stayed. So I started thinking, maybe what I ought to do is start learning to leave comfort zones, which takes me to my third lesson. When I was an undergrad, the Berlin Wall fell. Now, yes, I'm old. And again, I told you I was going to be an astronaut to become a fighter pilot. After I graduate, or right before I graduate, I start taking my flight aptitude test, and I did quite well, right? And I was willing to fly for either the Air Force or the Navy. All I wanted to do was fly fighter planes. There was a problem, is that because of the Berlin Wall fell, fortunately for the world, but unfortunately for me, there was a 60% reduction in the aerospace and defense industry, and there were no jobs. There was no need for fighter pilots as we reduced a tremendous amount of squadrons. Even if you went to a service academy, no one went to flight school, let alone someone who was not in ROTC, let alone just someone who was an engineer that got good grades. And again, there are no jobs, even with that GPA. So I held out, and I eventually went to go work for McDonnell Douglas. McDonnell Douglas today is called Boeing St. Louis. It took well over, I think, 6 to 8 months to get this job because they had not hired anyone in 4.5 years after they laid off 8,000 engineers in 2 weeks when the A-12 was canceled. So here I am. I walk in to McDonnell Douglas, the one and only hire at that time, and I get to work on this amazing program called the F-18 Super Hornet. So for anyone that has seen Maverick, Top Gun, right, I was on the design team for the wings and supporting carrier suitability. So shots and traps off of the carrier. Wonderful job, right? Fascinating work, and I also got to do the sustainment. The only issue is that I'm now 20, 21, let's call it 21, 22, somewhere in that time frame. The next closest person to me in age is 28. If you're in your 30s, you're still doing entry-level work. The average age is in the 40s out of a 400-person aeronautics and controls department. So I'm like, whew. So I decided to switch over to the Phantom Works, and in the process, go back to school, which has brought me here to MIT. So now I come to MIT, I walk in, and I'll tell you it was like starting all over at the University of Kansas. I am a trained engineer walking into some of the best and brightest scientists. And don't confuse, there are a very big difference between those two. Very big difference. And I quickly realized that my math that I received was great for an engineer, was not up to the standards of an MIT scientist. So what did I do? Now my first year in Boston, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Same thing I did at the University of Kansas. First semester, straight A's. And so during that, I was also then able to pick up funding because MIT was in disarray at the time as well because of the downturn. And these large laboratories that would take 40 students a year were taking 1 or 2. And I wasn't in that 1 or 2 category. So I was very fortunate. I deferred 1 year because of funding, but then I was able to arrange for NASA to pay for my funding as well as the Air Force. And the stippler is that for every summer, I had to either go to Edwards Air Force Base and NASA Armstrong or to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, which was an absolute blast. But I never spent a summer here in Boston until I graduated. Now, as it goes, I do my 2 years. Originally, I was only supposed to educational leave of absence from now McDonnell Douglas, 2 years. I'm supposed to return. The department goes, hey, why don't you take the doctoral exam? Okay. So I took it. Again, at that time, if you got invited to take that, 1/3 of all the people who were invited to take it failed. And at that time, they have since changed the rule. You had to believe in reincarnation because you got one shot in your lifetime. So again, I then studied. Everything had to be memorized, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 straight months, and that's all I did for that exam. Finished as one of the top in the exam. Went back to now Boeing, because they had bought McDonnell Douglas. Hey, what do you think about getting a PhD? And they said, oh, okay, no more than 3 years. No more. So I'm 2 years in, no more than 3 years. Took me a year and a half to get my coursework, and then again, the word luck. I was very fortunate that the theorem I developed, I was able to experimentally prove it in 2 flight simulators, one being an F-18 and one a Boeing 757. And I graduated from MIT in 2.5 years with a PhD. Don't underestimate luck. Now, if you really want to add this up, here's really the funny story. 2 degrees from MIT took me 4.5 years. 1 from KU took me 5. So now, again, I'm thinking about professional cliff diving again. I'm supposed to go back now to St. Louis. I'm already been deemed as a future VP of the Boeing Corporation, and I'm going to go work on this program called the Unmanned Combat Air Vehicle. It is January of 2000. And I think, well, we had done flight controls. I was a flight control engineer now. We're doing tailless fighters out in the desert, reconfigurable control, amazing stuff. That's kind of mature technology. So I'm supposed to go back and work on these UAVs and where they're going to fly and how are they going to find the adversary and then whether or not to neutralize them and how to do bomb damage assessment and so on. I'm like, should I go back to Boeing to do that or should I do that in a startup company? So I left Boeing, a perfectly great job, and then went cliff diving and went to a MIT spin-out company called Alphatech. And here was the deal at Alphatech. They give you a base contract of $1 million and grow that 20% per year to keep your job, just to keep your job. If you do much better than that, then they reward you. No, very limited infrastructure. And so in this startup company, I had to learn every aspect of a business. I started autonomy for our nation in January of 2000. Wait a minute, that's over 25 years ago. Wait a minute, you just saw on 60 Minutes, this is all brand new stuff, right? So 25 years ago, we started this. And built a complete business, right, from ground level, did 38% average growth over a long period of time, and then a company called BAE Systems buys the startup company. And so now I'm in a position here where having run a group in a startup company, I am now back into a major aerospace and defense company. Just that, remember I had left one, right, at this time 5 years prior. And I'm back in there, and I also have these things called golden handcuffs, right? I'm highly incentivized to stay in this company for 3 years, right, based upon the stock equity that I had in Alphatech. And so at 3 years, instead of jumping, going back to Boeing St. Louis, or doing another startup company, which I had proven to myself I could do, I decided to go cliff diving again. And I moved up to the main part of the BAE Systems company, and I started taking on a bunch of new assignments. So now, this puts me in 2008. 2008, we are now into a major, again, downturn in aerospace and defense. It's kind of been my trajectory throughout my career, nothing but downturn, up until recently. And in addition to that, I transitioned up, and I'm now a senior executive in an organization for which the next closest person to me is 20 years older. Sound familiar? And so here I am in a downturn, young, new, clearly not trustworthy. So what type of assignments do you think I get? The bad ones. The ones that no one else wants. So we start off, I'm in a strategy role. Wonderful job. I use that opportunity to take essentially the coursework of a strategy MBA and then apply it to that business. And then they were like, okay, we trust you. Now we're going to give you back profit loss, because up to that point in Alphatech, I had profit loss the entire time. And then I got my first portfolio was nothing but programs losing money, as red as can be in terms of customer satisfaction. And then the team that I basically had around me were the people that, again, they weren't really sure of. And oh boy, did we have a blast, right? It was fun. We turned the programs around, did a lot of good for our nation, but then this started this trajectory of them putting me in more and more assignments. And so pretty soon, this is an 8-year period of time, 5 different jobs. And it was because this part of the company's in trouble. We want you to go fix it. This part of the company. So this lesson here is all about, if you're offered the crappy assignment, jump at the opportunity for it. You will learn so much. You'll learn a tremendous amount from the hard jobs that are out there. So now 2 of them, we're in this, this program in the upper right. It's a $4 billion pursuit. And they're like, yeah, we're in a lot of trouble. We need you to go jump on that one. Sure, got it. The one after that was my rest and recovery job. Right, this is the one, so I can now start to lose weight, cut the grass. By the way, the prior one lasted about 3 years. We'll talk more about that later. And they're like, yeah, here's the nice cozy one. You guys, you get your life back in order. Program got canceled 2 months in. So what was supposed to be a rest and recovery job became yet another crisis job. So as we marched through all of these different assignments, I was basically put on every major issue, and I approached every single one as an opportunity to learn. And then finally, after a considerable period of time, they finally promoted me to a vice president. Now I think I'm only 12 years behind everyone else, age-wise. And so at this point, if you're familiar, an organization called Fast Labs, and then I ran all the electronic warfare for BAE Systems. So again, those up until that vice president, that entire period of time was a lateral. No change in title, no change in pay, but we want you to go take on this really, really hard assignment. And you sit there and you're like, yeah, I'm all into that. All right, now question for you, and this will lead into the next one. How many people here can juggle? If you can juggle 3 balls, raise your hand and keep it up. High, 3 balls. 4. We got no one? Anyone online for 4? All right, well, I have to keep going here. 5. 6. Anyone know what the record is? Balls. Balls. I heard it. 9. There's you got bean bags. I think the bean bags are up in the upper teens, right? But balls. So now, why do I bring this up? Is that for these turnaround assignments, so yes, now I'm a CEO, and I only found this book when I was becoming a CEO. But if you're ever in a tough assignment, I'm going to suggest this book by McKinsey and Company called CEO Excellence applies. And what it basically says is that you got to be able to juggle 6 balls simultaneously. Now, Wikipedia basically says that the number of people in the world on average that can juggle 6 balls, it's 1 in 200,000. So don't underestimate how hard this is. But I'm going to suggest in my number 5 that there is one sort of common undercurrent. That if you have to take on a tough assignment and take a team that's not performing to the expectations and you need to get them to perform, I'm going to suggest remember the 1/3 rule. This one is all about focus on the culture of the team. The business results will follow. But you got to get the culture right. Now, the 1/3 rule basically says you're a new leader, you get assigned to this job, The team is struggling. Everyone knows well, maybe not everyone's willing to accept it, but you're there because this team is struggling. Right out of the gate, you haven't even said a word yet, and 1/3 of the team thinks you're a complete buffoon. And they will never change their mind. On the very flip side of that is another third, doesn't matter what you do, they're on your side, and they're going to follow you. Guess what? They're not going to change their mind either. Which means, as a leader, your job is to focus on the middle third. The middle third are all honestly confused. They don't know whether to follow this leader's a buffoon or this leader knows what they're doing. But here's what's critical. If you can win the hearts and minds of that middle third, and they come and join your supporters, you've achieved critical mass, and the 1/3 will either be quiet, they'll stop fighting, or they'll leave. But it'll be the 2/3 that you now have to focus on inspiring them to achieve great results that they don't see them in themselves currently. So always remember, a lot of leaders, they go and focus on the 1/3 that supports them. You're wasting your time. They're always going to support you. Don't fight with the 1/3 that's never going to support you. There's a saying, again from Kansas, if you wrestle with the pig, you both end up with mud on you, and you don't know who actually the pig is in the end. Don't bother. Focus your energy on the middle third. Which takes me to my 6th recommendation. I'm a firm believer that you've got to stick your neck out there and fail early and often. If you look at the history of great leaders, right, you go back to Alexander the Great, you can go all the way through history, and you will see that the greatest leaders in history failed miserably early on. But they learned. And so there's a saying, right, you win some, you learn from some. I'm going to suggest you don't learn from winning. And if you've won your whole life, you really haven't learned a lot. It is only in the agony of defeat, if you're willing to look introspective on what you could have done differently at different points in time, can you win. And I'm going to suggest it's not about bouncing back. Bounce higher. But unless you fail, I don't believe you can truly be a great leader. Now, I'll take you back to 2 examples here. I told you I was on a major pursuit, $4 billion, we lost. Right? It was a 25,000 page proposal, over $100 million invested, right? Heads have to roll, right? And that was my head, by the way. Now, we had filed a protest, and the protest came back, and it was in our favor. But regardless, and that, by the way, that takes a long time for that to play out. But from the get-go, I owned the loss. Never once did I point the finger, and I basically told the CEO of the company, after some time and thinking about this, was, we were behind, and you really never catch up. So we should have just walked away then. 2, we knew we had some customer relationship issues. I didn't poke hard enough into those. And 3, I was just simply the wrong leader for the job. I was an engineer from MIT, and they didn't want one of those. They wanted someone who had retired from the military at very senior rank. So from the get-go, I was kind of your wrong leader. Sorry. Now, I told you about that cozy job that I then got, for which it was canceled. Well, I absolutely applied those lessons learned immediately. I certainly did not, as the engineer from MIT, try to be the face for that turnaround. I went and sought out retired 4-star flag officers that had the appropriate relationships. I did not try to alter Senator John McCain's view of the program, which was, by the way, very negative. right? I work through colleagues that happen to be our local senators and congresspeople to get Senator McCain to alter his view, and so on. So what I would suggest is that I do believe that you don't have to experience the failures personally. If you do read about great leaders, do read about their failures, not their successes. That would be my recommendation there. So now this takes me back to the defining of leadership. So key takeaways, right? I would suggest that dream big, take your chances when the opportunity presents itself, leave your comfort zones, take the tough assignments with the intent to learn, acknowledging that you are more likely than not to fail. Focus on changing the culture and the business results will follow, and fail early and often. Now, I would also say that this journey that I'm talking about does require yourself to really get to know yourself. And you cannot miss this step. I'll tell you, there's a lot of leaders out there today that, I mean, they are like spotless. It is amazing how spotless their resumes are. Nothing but success every step of the way. Those leaders scare me. All right? To me, if you haven't experienced the failure, and if you cannot clearly articulate what your motives, what your values are, you actually haven't led yourself, first and foremost. And to me, if you haven't led yourself, you're not really qualified to lead others. Because when you do get to the big stage, if the first time you experience failure is at the role of a CEO, you're going to hurt a lot of people. And so I'd rather you learn when you're not responsible for a lot of people, when you're just responsible for yourself. Now, it would be suggested here that, the position I'm in here today is kind of like it's not repeatable, right? And I'm going to suggest it is absolutely repeatable, right, to the 6 tenets that I have put forward. But I do also have a cautionary note. This is a full contact sport. Leadership is not for the faint of heart. Right? This 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, rest assured, if you want people to like you, right, leadership probably isn't it. Because I will suggest that leadership is, at the end of the day, all about doing the right thing. And for me in national security, the number one thing is to defend democracy around the globe. Number 2 is ensure that the organizations that I lead have a legacy for generations to come, well past me leading these organizations. Number 3 becomes my family and their legacy. Do you see where the I is in this? Nowhere in this is people liking you on social media. That's not leadership. And so it's not for the faint of heart. And I'll tell you right now, it can be extremely lonely, right, in this role. So, to this picture, why this graphic? Leadership is all about being a fish out of water. And until you jump out of water, you have no idea the concept of water. Because if you're in water at all the times, you don't understand air. And that is what leadership is all about. So with that, I thank you. I'll take a few questions, and then I do have a couple of more slides that we'll get to in about 10 minutes or so.
Any in-person questions on this side? Okay.
Hi, thank you for your personal insights. I understand that you worked extremely hard to get to where you are now. Do you have some tips for maintaining your health while maintaining that extremely hard workload?
Yes, excellent point. And in that CEO Excellence book, it is one of the plates, one of the balls. So I am very much an avid, you must work out, you must maintain your health. What I would do as a 20 or a 30-year-old, not a chance now. right? So don't even attempt to do that. But it requires everything together, right? If your physical health can't match, right, your emotional intelligence and your intellectual intelligence, right, it requires, in fact, all three of these to be very successful in these jobs. So going back to undergrad, I had literally no time to work out. All I did was study. That was not very healthy. I graduated with ulcers. So imagine having ulcers at the age of like 21, and that was from just pure caffeine intake and lack of sleep, because my work schedule, I had planned for about 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night, and I kept that routine for a year and a half. That doesn't work. Grad school, right? Remember? Learn, right? You go to the hospital and you got ulcers and you're with a bunch of people who are even older than I am right now, right? You should take something away from that. So in grad school, what I did is I then worked out 6 days a week. And I try to maintain that to this day. I'm still very, very active in sports. I still play hockey, right? I ski, I weight train, aerobic exercise. So it does become critical because you can actually not handle these type of jobs. These jobs, I'll be honest with you, can destroy you. Physically, your marriage, your relationships, you can't let it happen. Great question.
Thank you.
Hi. I want to say that your journey was just incredible, and right here.
There you go.
And I wanted to ask, how do you think the people around you really helped you? And do you think they played into like your luckiness? And how are they a mentor for you? And did you take any of their insights away into your own mentorship?
Yeah. So, well, clearly, you can go back. Without a stable family, right? None of this happens, right? So, growing up as the kid, right? You're not supposed to use the word anymore, but I was clearly the stupid kid, right? That's how I was branded. And just a really quick story. When I graduated from MIT, the newspaper in Kansas City is like, whoa, people don't graduate from MIT. So they wanted to interview me. The reporter went back to my high school and says, would you believe Jerry Wohletz graduated from MIT with a PhD? And one teacher said, go check your facts, not him. So I will suggest here that, very stable family, but you can't buy into what people want to believe about you. You got to go to beat to your own drum. I actually did not get formal mentorship until I was well into my executive ranks. And I would suggest that now that I've had mentorship now from multiple prior CEOs, invaluable. Sounding board, executive coach, all of that, I highly recommend it. So I do recommend that you seek out people, right, that have similar dreams or aspirations and talk to them. It's a great way to learn from their mistakes or the mistakes that they've observed from others without you having to repeat them.
Janae, can you please select 2 virtual students to ask a question?
Yes, so we'll have Ying-Chi Lee.
Hi, Mr. Wohletz, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, what's something that you wish more leaders understood about building great teams for major projects?
So building great teams for major project. So it's not about what's on the resume. When I was at Alpha Tech and I built my first team, on paper, the best team, right? The best schools, the best degrees from the best laboratories with the best GPAs. It was a dysfunctional team. So team chemistry. Team chemistry is far more important. And I'm going to suggest the following is that it doesn't really matter if the individuals on the team have the great GPAs or the degrees from the great schools. It's whether or not you have a common passion to achieve the outcome. To me, that's what it's all about. You've got to get a team that is passionate, that is willing to basically say, it doesn't matter what obstacle presents itself. We are going to find a way to get there. Whether we got to go around the obstacle, over it, under it, or my personal favorite, straight through it. But nothing is going to hold us back from achieving that bold vision. That's the team you want to build. And when you believe that you can get there, the creativity and the imagination that comes out from that team, unstoppable. To me, that's the most important ingredient, is that you've got to be worried about the chemistry and whether or not they believe. And I'm telling you, if you inherit a team that doesn't believe, back to the culture, your number one job is to get that team to believe, or go get a different team. A team that doesn't believe will not deliver for you. Great question.
Dia?
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was incredibly insightful. I was wondering, what new or distinct leadership challenges have you encountered at your current position in Draper, with it being both a research and nonprofit organization?
Believe it or not, it's every new assignment has its different challenges, but it's not that different from the prior tough assignments that I talked about. Draper, as storied organization, as Scott basically said, and to this day we still do the guidance system for supporting NASA in the Artemis program. Tremendous responsibility not to screw that up, right? But I've run larger organizations than what Draper is today, right? I've had more employees than I have today at Draper, but it's all different with regards to the complexity. What I'll say, which was for my learning, right? Clearly never been a CEO, but with a CEO, you don't have one or two bosses, right? I've got 11, right? That's big learning, right? Because you're not, when you have, so when I say one or two bosses, people are like, whoa, that doesn't sound right. In a large matrix organization, you generally have, here's your immediate boss, and if you're in a profit loss position, you really have one boss. But if you're in a functional role like engineering, you'll have your engineering boss, and then you'll have your program boss. That's how you come up with two. When you jump to a role of a CEO, it's however the size of the board is minus you. And they generally have completely different backgrounds. You have most likely zero shared experience with them, right? And you have to immediately be effective and get their buy-in. So for me personally, that would have been the biggest step for me at Draper. The other one would be that Draper was part of MIT, as Scott said, still operated largely consistent with MIT as a laboratory at MIT. But as Draper is approaching $1 billion in revenue, right, it required a step forward in sort of controls and governance. I call it bumper cars, right? So people can go fast but crash a car without getting hurt. To me, that was also kind of a big step because I always had that as a backstop for execution. But to me, I never thought I would be teaching corporate governance as a CEO. So, and that's kind of the point. Going into Draper, I knew I was going to learn about how to interface with the board. I never thought that I was going to have to get good at corporate governance and teach that to an institution. So one more question, and I got a slide that I'd like to show you. I think you guys want to see it.
Hello. So you mentioned you have to inspire the middle third, right? You have to get the team together and make them all inspired. How do you go about that? What are some ways you get the team inspired to get a good product going and a good team setup?
All right, so we covered this, right? So you have to paint the picture of a compelling, better tomorrow. But really what it's going to take is, and that goes to everyone, if they're struggling to get their job done, you got to go figure out what that struggle is, which means you're going to have to go see them and do their job. And when you can get someone to actually ask you for help, you better deliver help, which means you have allowed them to get their job done. What a lot of times leaders will do is help means provide me status briefs. And I remember as an entry-level engineer, why am I talking to leadership? They're actually not going to help, but I got to do all this work to tell them, here's what the problem is, and then they feel good that they know what the problem is, but they didn't help me. And all they did was create more work. So I'm going to suggest, if you really want to win the middle third, go solve their dilemma. at the person, literally at the individual level. Okay, now I got another section of my briefing. I think some of you are aware of this, but anyone interested in a job? Okay. Here's a picture of the BWSI interns at Draper this summer that graduated from the last 2 cohorts. All right? And just to give you an idea, here's our campuses. This is how big Draper is. And here's what we do for our educational mission. High school STEM programs, hey, that's what we're doing here today. Next one, co-ops and interns. We have 248 co-ops and interns this year at Draper. There are, in the Draper Scholar Program, we are currently funding 100 master's and PhD students in partnerships. This is an outgrowth of what the instrumentation lab, again, Scott's the historical name, did here on campus. We also have our own educational program, and in fact, we have a cohort from UMass Lowell and Amherst that's going through our GNC Academy this summer, because what we need in guidance, navigation, and control isn't necessarily taught mainstream in the universities today. So we now have to teach that. And then finally, we have our own executive leadership training courses for Draper employees to replicate the type of training that I was offered in my career. So now to you. Consistent with the last prior years, at graduation, there will be about a dozen interns offered to current students in the program based upon how well you've done in the program. All right, and so if you see the purple lanyards around, they're the ones telling us who. So be good to them. All right. In addition to that, what you see here is that if you want to apply, apply. Now, I will tell you that for our 248 students, we received over 30,000 applications. So, see the deadlines? Stay on top of it. I encourage you to network into Draper, right? But we are going to continue to do this. What I'm growing this to be is 250 undergraduate students per year, and then 250 graduate students per year, for a total of 500 students per year at Draper. And we're getting close to hitting those targets. All right? So with that, I mean, normally we're saying no cameras, right? But I'll leave you with this one slide up here. I encourage you to apply if you are interested. And this is the point where you actually can take a picture.
So we have a couple of students from Race Car we'd like to invite down.
My name is Rashik, and I'm from the race car course. And I loved your amazing presentation. You really drove in all your points with like humility, and you had a really unique take on leadership in general. Some of your metaphors, like bounce back higher, was something I'll hopefully carry with me throughout my life.
Hi, I'm Kieran. I'm also from Race Car. And I really liked your take on leadership, especially the emphasis on personal leadership, that comes first at all times. And to thank you, we have a t-shirt.
Great, thank you. We got to take a picture. Are you guys going to win?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, all right. All right. Thank you. All right, they confirmed they are going to win the race car competition. All right, well, thank you very much. I always enjoy these. Scott, over to you. Oh.
Oh, so first, let me just dismiss the virtual students. So just a reminder, for in-person students, Thursday, make sure you wear your Beaver Work shirt. So that gives you tonight and tomorrow night to get it washed. So make sure we get it washed and we're all looking nice and spiffy for Thursday. And virtual students, we're going to be announcing soon a t-shirt competition. So everything's always on the dashboard. There's Draper information's on the dashboard as well. So just make sure you're looking at the dashboard daily, because you never know when we threw some stuff up there. The Raytheon internship went up there yesterday as well. So just make sure you're checking that dashboard daily. And virtual students, you guys can leave now. We'll see you tomorrow. And in person.